Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kate. I'm joined by my friend Andrew, and in this episode, we're going to be looking back at a very interesting Batman movie, and that is Batman and Robin from 1997. Andrew, looking back at Batman and Robin, for you as a Batman fan, how does this movie make you feel?
This movie makes me sad as a Batman fan. It really does. That we started with the Tim Burton movies and then we somehow ended up with this. And for a long time, this was the last Batman live action movie until Christopher Nolan came out of the woodwork and decided to save the franchise.
Which, thank you, Christopher Nolan, for that.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you desperately for that.
Well, I'll tell you what, looking back at this movie, I will acknowledge this before we get into our overall thoughts on the film. I will acknowledge this. So I think the best thing about this movie is Michael Gough as Alfred. His portrayal of the character throughout the Burton and Schumacher era remains consistently well acted, and he always brings a great amount of life to the screen. So yeah, I think he's definitely the best thing about this movie.
Yeah, he brings a lot of warmth and likability to the character of Alfred, which is, I think, necessary considering the fact he is kind of Batman's emotional heart
Yeah, and voice to reason also.
and voice to reason. He's not afraid to maybe call Batman out on some of his BS on occasion. But he never feels like he's just browbeating him for the sake of browbeating him. Because he clearly does care about Bruce. That's something that's always a critical part of any portrayal of Alfred Pennyworth.
Yeah, so that's something that he definitely accomplishes well in all four movies that he's in. But yeah, so that's the best thing about the movie for me, and I think it is for you. But why don't we get into the rest of the movie? So here's what I think we should talk about first. Do you want to talk about the bat nipples?
Yes, let's talk about the bat nipples.
My main question for that is why? I mean, because what was the point of the nipples is my question.
That is a very good question. What was the point of the nipples? Another question is what was the thought process that went into putting that into the script? Because there is very few scenes in Hollywood history that I would have loved to have been in the writing room for more than when somebody he came up with the brilliant idea. Let's put nipples on the bat suit. And the fact that nobody then turned to said person who suggested the idea and said, "You're fucking fired."
Well, and don't forget, Batman Forever was the movie that introduced the nipples. This is the one that just featured them more prominently.
Were they introduced in Batman Forever?
Yep, they sure were.
Oh god, but still, bat nipples, and also let's not forget bat asses too.
Yes, that is very true. I'll tell you what, why don't we talk about the two titular characters of the film, Batman and Robin? Let's start off with Batman. I will say this, I really like George Clooney as an actor, but as Batman, he just really couldn't save the role with the material that he was given. I'm not really sure if anyone could. Also, one issue that I have with this movie, and this relates to a lot of the other Batman movies, I'm not going to lie, the movie isn't really about Batman.
No, it's really not because Batman's presented as kind of a dipshit in this movie, and you really think about it.
Yeah, especially in that scene where they're at Mr. Freeze's hideout when they look at the footage of Poison Ivy and Bane breaking Freeze out of Arkham. And then you see the photos of them when they arrived in Gotham. And Batman says, "This is definitely the same pair that sprang Freeze." Yeah, I think we noticed that, Batman, really.
Yeah, who else would it have been in that moment? Yeah,
Well, here's another issue that I have with the movie. So, if you look back at some of the best Batman movies, like The Batman or the Dark Knight trilogy, Batman Begins, Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises, one of the reasons why each of those movies were so great is because they each gave Batman an arc and development. In this movie, if you look back at it, not even halfway through the runtime, it becomes pretty clear that they're not really going to give him an arc or flesh him out as a character.
yeah. And in all honesty, he really doesn't change too much over the course of this movie. He doesn't really develop. I think the closest we get is him dealing with the emotional sadness of Alfred's illness. But then they solve that by the end of the movie, so it kind of just sort of doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that in a few minutes, but why don't we talk about Robin next?
You mean the whiny faced bitch boy who in this movie? Yeah.
Oh, do you want to talk about him first?
Oh my god. Okay. I like Chris O'Donnell as an actor, but my god was he horribly cast in this movie. And much like George Clooney, he really could not rise above this god awful excuse of a script. Because from what I understand, the thought process was for introducing Robin into the Batman live action movies was that they wanted to appeal to kids and sell toys. Okay, that's all well and good. Why then would you make him a whiny brat who seems to know A, presents himself as a colossal know it all, B, presents himself as always right, and just make him so unlikable? When in the comics, Dick Grayson is a pretty likable character who becomes a very complicated character further down the road, but that's a conversation for another time. Why would you do that? I think we could agree the most iconic sidekick in comic book history.
Yeah, definitely. And another issue is throughout most of the movie, it's mainly just him and Batman bickering with each other. It's mainly about how, he's treated like a child, which, I mean, that is kind of true to Batman and Robin's, relationship in the comics. Dick Grayson did eventually grow tired of being treated like the sidekick, but at this point, it just gets really overdone and annoying. And also, they're also bickering throughout most of the movie about who Poison Ivy wants more after she uses their hypnotism on him.
Yeah, because that fits the dynamic duo's relationship is let's bicker constantly, and this is just a me thing, but there's few things more annoying in TV or cinema than being forced to watch two characters you already don't like bicker constantly. Because it to me that's borderline change the channel levels of I really can't watch this.
Well, and just to be clear, when it comes to Batman and Robin's dynamic, I don't have an issue with them, having problems with each other or having a kind of strained relationship. It's just this is not what I look for when I watch a Batman movie or read a comic or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I understand there's always going to be some tension, some conflict in this superhero duo, but it's never this annoying and constant all the time, bickering back and forth over something as dumb as, oh, which supervillain likes us more? It really is that dumb. And I'm sure we'll save this for further down the line, but a lot of the major faults that people make fun of for this movie are really a result of the script.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but now that we've talked about Batman and Robin, why don't we move on to the villains of the movie?
Oh, dear Lord, let's talk about the villains.
Yeah, I think we should start off with Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. And just for everybody listening, when it comes to Mr. Freeze, Andrew is a massive fan of this character, so I think I'm going to let him talk about Mr. Freeze first. Andrew, go ahead.
Okay. As Kate just mentioned, Mr. Freeze is not only my favorite Batman villain, he's my favorite supervillain of all time. I loved his portrayal in the animated series from the 90s. I absolutely adored his portrayal in Batman Arkham City. I think that was actually probably the best portrayal of Mr. Freeze. But every time I bring up that Mr. Freeze is my favorite supervillain to anybody I know, the first response I get is, oh, I get a stupid ice pun back in my face. Yes, this movie decided to take the incredibly intelligent and ultra sympathetic, tragic villain that is Victor Freeze. Again, one of the most sympathetic villains in comic books. I think you would agree, Kate.
Yes, I do agree.
The whole thing is he wants to save his wife. He has a very noble goal, but he goes about it in completely the wrong way of trying to solve his conflict. And that's what turns him to villainy. Also, he kind of got screwed over too, because I believe in the comics he was working on a cure, and then all of a sudden the people who were funding it kind of threatened to pull the plug on it.
Yep, and that's exactly what led to the accident.
Yes, so let's take this incredibly complicated, multi-layered character and put him in the worst comic book costume for a villain in film history, where he literally looks like he's wearing a dime store. Actually, no, he doesn't even look like an action figure. He looks like a Chinese knockoff action figure you buy for your kid at the dollar store because they won't shut up while you're going grocery shopping.
Well, and when it comes to all the ice puns that he makes throughout the movie, and
Oh God, the ice puns.
I honestly can't keep track of how many he makes, definitely a lot. But here's the thing, because of all that, and also just his portrayal overall, they reduce him to a sort of joke character. And this just makes any attempt to sympathize with him less powerful. It just makes him less sympathetic as a villain and as a character.
It completely butchers the character because in this movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze. He's not ultra intelligent. He's not ultra complicated. He's not really that sympathetic because he's just too damn ridiculous. And he's a comedic relief character in a movie that's already too damn ridiculous for a comedic relief character to be necessary. This isn't the worst villain in comic book movie history, but it's certainly in the conversation. And it pisses me off because again, this is my all-time favorite supervillain. And yet this is the only big screen portrayal we have of him is a walking, talking ice pun. That is the only big screen portrayal we have of this incredibly well-written, sympathetic, but still evil supervillain. And that to this day is still pisses me off to no end.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. But why don't we talk about Poison Ivy next? Because she is a character that I feel was also done dirty. The truth is, every time I look back at this movie, I don't know if you agree, but they might try to make her seem like Poison Ivy, but she just doesn't really feel like Poison Ivy, the Poison Ivy that we know from the comics at all.
No, she seems campier, more like a more yeah, again, like a campier villain than opposed to an actual femme fatale like she was in the comics or in the Arkham games, which I think again was probably her best portrayal.
Yeah, I honestly think her best portrayal was either in the Arkham games or the animated series from the 90s. That was one of my favorite versions of the character.
Can we just give a shout out to how much or to how great the animated series was, considering the
Absolutely.
fact this is what the movies were looking like at the time, and yet we got this universally beloved, incredibly well written and voice acted TV show around the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely a phenomenal show. One of my favorite shows of all time. But yeah, back to Poison Ivy. In the animated series, she's done very well. But in this movie, like I was saying, it doesn't really feel like Poison Ivy. The problem is, this is just my opinion, but she comes off as more of a Power Rangers villain with a plant fetish. That's what I take away from it.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe her because number one, Uma Thurman horribly overacts her in this movie. Now I understand everybody overacts in this movie, but oh my god, Uma Thurman takes it to another degree, chewing the scenery constantly, and thus again it makes her seem more ridiculous than actually like an intimidating femme fatale. And then throw the snot green, really just cheaply looking made costume on top of that. Yeah, just it's just again you described it perfectly. She feels more like a Power Rangers villain, as does Mister Freeze to a lesser extent. Now that I think about it.
Well, here's another thing, and I just want to just talking about Mr. Freeze. Here's what I will say to this, Andrew. I understand, how much you love Mr. Freeze as a character and as a villain, and how you feel this movie really does him dirty, and I agree. But I want to acknowledge this. If you think that this movie does Mr. Freeze wrong, why don't we talk about Bane?
Oh god, yeah, there's another one. Now, admittedly, Bane is not one of my favorites. I don't know if he's one of your favorite villains, Kate.
I wouldn't say that he's top 3 or 5, but I'd say he's at least top 10. He's definitely one of Batman's most dangerous foes and also one of his most intelligent ones because he's not just muscle. He's also this really intelligent criminal mastermind. And he's also, again, like I said, one of the deadliest Batman villains and most dangerous Batman villains ever created.
Yeah, because I mean, he figured out who Batman was and then broke the bat. There's that very iconic scene of him breaking the bat from the comics. Bane is a legitimately very good bad guy. So what do they do with him in this movie? Let's make him a generic brute with no personality.
Yeah, they pretty much just reduce him to a Frankenstein's monster type of character who works for Poison Ivy. And it's just a waste of a character, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's another butchering of a iconic character, but it didn't piss me off as much as Mr. Freeze did.
Well, think about this though. You have two characters like Mr. Freeze and Bane working together. In the comics, two very intelligent villains working together. That could have been really awesome.
Yeah, that feels like it could have worked. Again, if this was a better written movie with better portrayals of iconic supervillains. But yeah, no, I see where you're coming from. That could have worked. They feel like they could work together. But what's the team up we get in this movie? Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy.
Yeah, and I will say this when it comes to the two villains teaming up, and look, I understand that I'm a dumbass, but why would the two of them working together make sense? Because is in the end, Mr. Freeze decides that he wants to freeze the planet, and Poison Ivy decides that she wants to populate it with only plants. So, how exactly is that plan supposed to coexist?
They physically, like down to the actual like iota of existence, those two plans cannot coexist. So why would they team up these two villains together?
Well, and honestly, when it comes to the plot of the movie, if they could have done something a little different, I think it would have been awesome if they were both against each other. Usually in superhero films, the villains team up. I think what isn't explored enough is when the villains are against each other. I think that would have been a lot better.
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree because I feel like a race between the two villains about who can get their master plan to succeed the first would be better because again their plans literally cannot coexist together because either you need warm temperatures for a planet to be covered in plant life or you need extreme cold for it to be covered in ice and thus nothing can grow. These plans literally cannot happen at the same time. So why would they team these two characters up when their entire needs for existence and their entire plot are like oil and water?
Well, and here's the other thing. So, regarding all the characters that we've talked about so far, the villains, Batman and Robin, I guess that if we didn't have enough main characters already, I guess that the story also needed Batgirl because I'm not really sure why Batgirl was in this movie, and this is nothing against Alicia Silverstone, and I actually do like Batgirl as a character. Barbara Gordon is definitely a very well-written character in the comics, but here's my question for you. Was she really necessary for the plot?
She's really not. And from what I understand, that was kind of like the sense behind the scenes, too. I remember seeing an interview about this movie that Alicia Silverstone did, and she didn't even realize she was playing Batgirl till she got on set.
Yes, that's right.
It from what I understand, the vibe, like the whole backstage behind the scenes making of this movie, was kind of a mess.
Yeah, and another thing is when it comes to Batgirl as a character in this movie, you got to remember something. She's not Barbara Gordon. She's Barbara Wilson, the niece of Alfred, which I don't understand why they had to make this change. Was it just to tie things together better? Because why couldn't she just be the commissioner's daughter like she is in the comics? That's my question.
Yeah, that takes away a major piece of her character, is the relationship between her and Commissioner Gordon, but it also takes away a major part of the relationship between Batman and Commissioner Gordon. Is, what do you mean you've been using my daughter as a vigilante supervillain, and then because of she's now confined to a wheelchair because Joker shot her?
Yes. And with Batgirl, there's a whole subplot in the movie about her being a motorcycle racer so that she can earn money and take Alfred away from his life as the Wayne family butler. I don't understand why this was such a necessary layer for the story. Instead of having Batgirl, being Alfred's niece and having her want to take Alfred away when we find out that he's sick, I think that this was kind of a wasted opportunity. When you have Alfred being sick, which coincidentally is the same disease that was killing Mr. Freeze's wife, why not explore Batman and Alfred's relationship in this movie? That was something that the first three movies didn't really explore all that much. I think, the best thing that we get is we see brief flashbacks throughout the movie of Bruce when he was a kid and Alfred. And that's really the most of what we get from their past relationship. I think that this would have been a great opportunity to explore their relationship better because of the fact that Alfred was dying instead of bringing in Batgirl and making her Alfred's niece. So that I think was kind of a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, again, making her Alfred's niece just kind of felt really unnecessary. I think is kind of like the best way to sort of put a bow around what our feelings about this, and just kind of didn't really need to be here in the first place. I think we can agree on that.
Well, and one of the reasons why I say it was kind of a wasted opportunity when it comes to exploring Bruce and Alfred's relationship is because in one of their interactions, we actually get two of the best lines in the movie, in my opinion. And that's when Bruce asks Alfred if he ever regretted working for them. And Alfred said, "No, not at all. My only regret is that I was never able to be out there with you." And then Bruce says to him, "Well, not all heroes wear masks." Those are actually two of the best lines in the movie.
Yeah, and that's part of what I consider the best part of this movie is the shall we say fireside chats between Bruce and Alfred, where there's like actual genuine emotion and character development in this otherwise complete burning trash fire of a superhero movie.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but another thing that bugs me when it comes to Batgirl's character is how she discovers the Batcave and discovers Batman and Robin's secret identities. So we find out that the access code to the Batcave, of all things, is Peg.
Yes, I don't remember the reasoning behind that.
It was Alfred's sister.
I see. Okay.
So we find out that the entrance code to the Batcave is Peg, the name of Alfred's sister. And then we also find out that Alfred somehow was able to use his brain algorithms to create a virtual self and also give her her bat suit that he was also working on while he was very sick.
So Alfred just casually created an AI. Good for him. I'm sure if he, when he survives his illness, he could probably make a mint selling that technology to the highest bidder and probably retire as the Wayne Butler.
Well, and here's my other question for that. So he gives her the disc so that she can use the access code to get into the Batcave, but she makes multiple attempts and fails. And then eventually she guesses the right one, goes into the Batcave, finds the brain algorithm or the AI, and gets the bat suit. Here's my question though. Couldn't he have just given her the suit?
Yeah, that I kind of get the vibe of what they were going for there, where it's like she kind of needed to prove she was smart enough to be a member of the team by getting into the Batcave and finding it. But it was just handled so clumsily, it kind of doesn't make too much sense. Do you feel the same way?
No, I totally understand what you're saying, but regarding some of the other characters in the film, one character that I feel is definitely underutilized is the character of Jim Gordon. So this is how I feel about all of the movies in the Schumacher era. Gordon, to me, just didn't really do much in all of those movies. He's mainly on the sidelines. I mean, you see him throughout the movie when they're going up against the villains, but he's mainly just there. In the first two, at least he was shown to be a competent and dedicated police commissioner. But in Batman Forever and this movie, Gordon is portrayed as this sort of buffoon who doesn't really contribute much to the overall plot of the film. And that just really rubs me the wrong way because I really like Gordon as a character. He's one of the most competent and dedicated GCPD officers. And that's what these movies reduce him, this movie specifically.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly, up until you mentioned him, I kind of completely forgot that. Oh yeah, we did do Commissioner Gordon in these movies. Oh yeah, I you're so inconsequential to the plot that I kind of completely forgot you're here. And we're talking about one of the most famous Batman supporting characters, I would say, of all time.
Yeah, agreed. One of the most important and essential Batman characters ever created.
Yeah, one of the few characters that Batman genuinely wholly trusts, and a part of his support system for a very, very long time. Let's portray that character so forgettably that I genuinely didn't even remember him being in these movies.
Well, and one character who I feel isn't essential to the plot either is the character of Julie Madison, Bruce's girlfriend. So there's a whole romance subplot in this movie where they tease the idea that Bruce might finally settle down with someone. And this is shown in the scene where he and Julie are having dinner and she says, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And he says, I'm not the marrying kind. And she tells him to just think it over. Okay, I can see what they were going for, but the problem with this is that Julie just only has a few scenes in this movie. She didn't really do anything and she didn't add anything to the plot. And this is an issue that I feel not every Batman movie, but a lot of the Batman movies I've struggled with is when it comes to love interests. And this is an example of when it really struggled with that because, again, she just didn't really contribute anything to the plot.
No, she didn't. And honestly, I feel like you could completely cut her out of this movie and it really wouldn't change that much. This movie suffers, I think, from too many character syndrome, or as I like to call it, I like to use the old adage of too many he cooks ruin the broth.
Well, here's the thing about these types of movies. You can have a lot of characters. It's just about whether they actually play a role in the plot and whether they connect to it well. And in this case, it's that they do have too many characters and they just don't really connect well with everything that's going on, most of them. And that's kind of an issue that I feel other superhero movies have had as well.
Yeah, I mean, Spider-Man 3 comes to mind in that case.
Yeah, yeah, true. But other than that, why don't we talk about Gotham City in this movie? Because I don't know if this was your least favorite, but this is honestly my least favorite Gotham City in all the live action films. Because the main reason why is because if you look at it, it just doesn't really feel like Gotham City at all.
Yeah, and this is something that I think I discussed in great detail during our analysis of The Batman, was that Gotham City finally truly felt like Gotham City. It had the architecture perfect, it had the grungy, dingy vibe to it. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is my least favorite Gotham for the exact same reasons that you don't like it. It's too colorful, it's too cartoony. It just am I the only one who gets the vibe? It feels more like a stage play set than a movie set.
I can see what you're saying with that. Yeah. And here's my issue with that. So when it comes to the both of Joel Schumacher's films, obviously they wanted to go in a much lighter direction after how dark Tim Burton's first two films were. But here's the thing, these are supposed to still be continuations from those first two movies, but they just don't feel that way at all. They're just too lighthearted and bright and colorful. It's too different from Tim Burton's movies for me to believe that it's in the same continuity.
Yeah, it's too much of a disconnect. It becomes, it feels very obvious of his when you watch them. I just think, I just feel like they went too far in the opposite direction when they changed directors. This would be like going from a Christopher Nolan directed hit movie to something directed by Peter Jackson. There'd just be too, they're too different of directors to direct things in the same franchise.
Yeah, I see what you're saying with that. But also, just as we get to the end of this episode, one of the things I did want to bring up is remember how there was supposed to be a fifth Batman movie, a sequel to this one called Batman Unchained, which would have been directed by Joel Schumacher as well. And it would have brought back George Clooney, Chris O'Donnell, Alicia Silverstone. And the villain of that movie was supposed to be the Scarecrow. So, how do you think that movie would have turned out?
Uh, Weirdly enough, I get the feeling it would have been better than this one. I don't know why. I just get that feeling. Maybe they would have gotten all of the extraneous fluff out of their system with this movie, and maybe they would have, looked at all the negative feedback they got from this movie and maybe fixed their mistakes. Because I know not Batman Forever isn't considered anybody's favorite Batman movie, but I know it's definitely better received than this was. So I don't know. Maybe weirdly enough, I kind of would have wanted to see it just to see if they could have maybe rebounded a little bit. I still don't think it would have been great because I just don't think Joel Schumacher was a great choice for a Batman movie. And nothing against Joel Schumacher. He does have several very enjoyable films under his belt, but I don't know. I just don't think he was the right choice to helm a Batman movie. It would feel like Michael Bay helming a Batman movie. It just doesn't feel like the right choice.
Well, and last thing that I think we should talk about is certain characters that I think still need redemptions when it comes to their live action portrayals on the big screen. Because if you look back at characters in these movies like Riddler, Two-Face, and Bane, all those characters have definitely been redeemed on the big screen in Chris Nolan's movies and recently Matt Reeves's film. But when you look at characters like Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, Robin, and Batgirl, those characters have yet to be redeemed on the big screen. So I hope that we do see that at some point. Do you think that we could see them in the Batman franchise or in James Gunn's new DCU?
I definitely feel like Poison Ivy, Robin, and Batgirl, that would be more of a DCU thing under James Gunn. Mr. Freeze, I could definitely see working in Matt Reeves' universe, and I would really like to see him do that because I feel like he would fit more in the kind of gritty, more down to earth Gotham that is the Batman universe as opposed to and we discussed this before, the probably more superhero-y aspect of the DCU.
Yeah. Any last thoughts that you have on the film that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
How did we go this entire discussion without talking about the Bat credit card?
Yes, the Bat credit card.
Because on its own, just as a 2 second bit on the screen, it's already terribly stupid. But then you think about it more and more and more, and it gets even more stupid because that means that Batman would have had to go to a bank or a credit union or a credit card lender, provide all of his personal information, which would have probably been used to, reveal his location, and then individually request the Batman logo on his credit card.
And don't forget that it's good forever.
Does it say no expiration date?
Yeah, it says good through forever.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of those where it's like, wow, that's really stupid when you see it on screen and then you think about it for 10 seconds. It's like, wow, that's incredibly stupid. Again, the script I feel like the script needed like 3 or 4 more go-overs before people started shooting this monstrosity.
Well, it could be argued that while it's probably the worst Batman film ever made, it could also be viewed as one of the most important Batman films because it taught people what not to do with a Batman movie.
Exactly. I think that's a very good way of putting it.
All right, guys, I think that that's the end of this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Threads, and we will see you guys later.